The Lost Continent of Atlantis. Part 1. Discovery, the Lost Continent of Atlantis. Ruins. Map evidence. Ancient writings about Atlantis. Discovery, the Lost Continent of Atlantis. This is probably the greatest discovery in world history, was stated by Maxine Asher, the co-director of a scientific expedition that found Atlantis at the bottom of the ocean, reported United Press International (UPI) and major newspapers in the United States during the summer of 1973. UPI continued that Maxine Asher said that scuba divers found data to prove the existence of the super civilization which legend says sank beneath the sea thousands of years ago. The divers had found evidence of roads and large columns, some with concentric spiral motifs, in the exact place described by the Greek philosopher Plato, beyond the Pillars of Hercules, off Spain. The group of some 70 scientists, teachers and adventurers was endorsed by Pepperdine University in Los Angeles, California. In the following pages shall be revealed over 30 ruins, including pyramids, domes, paved roads, rectangular buildings, columns, canals and artifacts that have been found on the ocean bottoms from the Bahamas to the nearby coasts of Europe and Africa, referencing the vast size of the lost continent. We will discuss how over a dozen respected historians and famous writers wrote about the Atlantis they believed existed, how the Mayans and Aztecs had told their conquerors that they came from Atlantis and Mu, about ancient tablets photographed in Peru showing those two lost continents, Atlantis and Lemuria, and discuss ancient maps clearly showing Atlantis. We shall explore geological evidence that Atlantis was once above water. Most importantly, we will recall the rise and fall of Atlantis, Lemuria, Thul, Lumania, and other lost continents that had culture, educational systems, technology and government far advanced from where we are here in the 1990s. This information is not based on any New Age channeling or psychic recall or manifestations. It is primarily based on many ancient writings found around the world. Ruins. 1. City on the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean off Spain, found by Dr. Maxine Asher's expedition in 1973 and reported by UPI. Asher was interviewed and evidence was witnessed by Steve Omar, director of the Mind International Research Agency, Maui, Hawaii. 2. Pyramid explored by Dr. Ray Brown on the seafloor of the Bahamas in 1970. Brown was accompanied by 4 divers who also found roads, domes, rectangular buildings, unidentified metallic instruments, and a statue holding a mysterious crystal containing miniature pyramids. The metal devices and crystals were taken to Florida for analysis at a university there. What was discovered was that the crystal amplified energy that passed through it. Brown interviewed by Mind 3. Ruins of roads and buildings found off Bimini Island in the 1960s by the photographed and published expeditions of Dr. Manson Valentine. Stephen Forsberg, co-founder of the Lahaina Times newspaper, dove into these ruins in 1982 to witness them firsthand. Similar ruins were also photographed off Casal in the Bahamas. The ruins are of the same construction as the oldest city ever found on land, according to archaeologists, in Tiahuanaco, Bolivia, where a calendar was uncovered that shows the exact position of the stars and planets 27,000 years ago. This is more than 20,000 years before the oldest civilizations in school history books. 4. Similar underwater ruins found off Morocco and photographed 50 to 60 feet underwater. 5. Dr. David Zink found in 1957, off the Bahamas coast, a stylized marble head, building block cast in a mold and a construction piece drilled by a bit, as well as a stone column that he reported radiated energy. Forsberg of Mind interviewed Dr. Zink and obtained the photographs. 6. A ruined harbor-like complex discovered on the seafloor off Bimini by Captain John Alexander. 7. The deep-sea diving submarine Illuminaut discovered a well-preserved paved road on the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean made of blacktop magnesium oxide, running along the seafloor from Florida to South Carolina. 8. Temple pillars, buildings, statues, white curving boulevards with smaller avenues branching out like spokes in a wheel, majestic temples and pyramids videotaped by Captain Reyes Moraga on the Spanish-named salvage ship Talia. 9. A huge 11-room pyramid found 10,000 feet underwater in the mid-Atlantic Ocean with a huge crystal top, as reported by Tony Bendlk. 10. Several acres of white marble-like ruins found on tile ocean floor off Cuba reported by Lee Caesar Hemingway. 11. Mysterious dome structures reportedly seen in clear water by several pilots in the Straits of Florida. 12. Soviet expeditions to the Atlantic Empire Seamount resulted in photographs of ruins destroyed by lava. Like the Aztecs and Mayans, wrote Atlan was destroyed by. This discovery was in the New York Times newspaper May 21, 1978. The photos were developed by the Academy's Petrovsky-Marikayev and reported by the deputy director of the Soviet Academy of Sciences Institute of Oceanography, Professor Aksyonov, who also reported ruins found off Cadiz, Spain in the same area as Dr. Maxine Asher's previous discovery. 13. 1981 expedition of P. Capellano discovered mysterious ruins with strange symbols on them on the seafloor off the Canary Islands. 14. 1977 report of a huge pyramid found off Cayce in the Bahamas, photographed by Ari Marshall's expedition, about 150 feet underwater. The pyramid was about 650 feet high. Mysteriously, the surrounding water was lit by sparkling white water flowing out of the openings in the pyramid and surrounded by green water, instead of the black water everywhere else at that depth. 15. An urn brought to the surface by Dr. Asher's expedition. 16. The foundations of a 100 by 75-foot structure photographed on the sea bottom off Andros Island. 17. A sunken city about 400 miles off Portugal found by Soviet expeditions led by Boris Sisterua, with buildings made of extremely strong concrete and plastics. He said the remains of streets suggest the use of monorails for transportation. He added that he brought up a statue. 18. A 6-foot column or spire protruding from a double circular gear-like base embedded in the ocean floor, with peculiar light emanations from the bottom of the shaft showing up in photos taken by Dr. William Bell in 1958. 19. Pillars found on the Atlantic floor in 1969 by Robert Farrow and Michael Grumley, a chunk of which was carved from rock not found anywhere in that part of the world. 20. A road off the Bahamas explored by Dr. Manson Valentine. 21. Dmitry Rybakov, using his underwater platform and a special collecting lens, reported ruins found encircling an underwater freshwater spring. 22. Marble Acropolis underwater across 5 acres of fluted columns raised on pillars. 23. Heinrich Schliemann, the man who found and excavated the famous ruins of Troy, which historians thought was only a legend, reportedly left a written account of his discovery of a bronze vase with a metal unknown to scientists who examined it, in the famous Priam treasure. Inside it are glyphs in Phoenician stating that it was from King Kronos of Atlantis. Identical pottery was found in Tiahuanaco, Bolivia. 24. 20 researchers, including archaeologists, a marine biologist, geologist, and cartographer dove on the ruins on the seafloor off Bimini in 1975 and brought back artifacts from which they concluded that the walls and roads were made of materials not found in that part of the world. Plato and others wrote that Atlantis was a huge continent like Africa, stretching across the Atlantic. The Aztecs, Mayans and Incas and other Indian tribes told explorers of the sunken Atlan in the Atlantic and the sunken Mu Lemuria in the Pacific. In the Pacific, ruins of an ancient city were explored on the ocean floor off Pineapple Island. Another was found underwater 30 miles off Easter Island. A ruined road on Rarotonga Island goes into the ocean, runs underwater for many miles, and comes out of the ocean on another island in a straight line. Professor Menzies, from Duke University, photographed a ruined civilization on the sea bottom between Peru and Tahiti with unknown hieroglyphics on a column. Monolithic ruins from a lost civilization were found on a half-dozen South Pacific islands, which are said to be Lemurian mountain peaks above water. Map evidence. 1. Professor Charles Hapgood, professor of geology at New Hampshire University, reported that a large unknown Atlantic island appears on an ancient map, the famous map seen on TV and in dozens of books. 2. An ancient map that King Henry owned in 1500 AD clearly shows Atlantis. 3. Greek documents and maps showing Atlantis that Christopher Columbus studied before he set sail for America, including the 1482 Benincasa map showing Atlantis islands that no longer exist. Ancient writings about Atlantis. 1. Plato wrote a detailed account of Atlantis with its location, later history, culture, and destruction. 2. Ancient writings from the Aztecs and Mayans like the Chilambalam, Dresden Codex, Popol Vuh, Codex Cortesianus, and Troano manuscript were also translated into histories of the destruction of Atlantis and Lemuria. 3. The Orelinda book from Holland is said to be one of the oldest books ever found. Adela tells of the destruction of the large Atlantic island by earthquakes and tidal waves. 4. The ancient Greek historian Diodorus wrote that thousands of years earlier Phoenicians had been to the immense Atlantic island where Plato wrote Atlantis was. Note that Phoenician hieroglyphics have been found on numerous ruins in the South American jungles that are so ancient that the white Indian tribes nearby lost memory of who built these ruins. Diodorus wrote that the Atlanteans had war with the Amazonians. 5. The Greek cantor reported visiting Egypt where they saw a marble column carved with hieroglyphics about Atlantis. 6. Greek historian Ammianus Marcellinus wrote about the destruction of Atlantis. He was highly respected. 7. Proclus visited the islands off Africa, Canaries or Azores, where the natives told him of the destruction of Atlantis around 450 AD long before that date. 8. Plutarch wrote about the lost continent in his book Lives. 9. Herodotus, regarded by some as the greatest historians of the ancients, wrote about the mysterious island civilization in the Atlantic and a city on it located in the region the Dr. Escher expedition found just that. 10. The Greek historian Timagenes wrote of the war between Atlantis and Europe and said tribes in ancient France said that it was their original home. Note that clear bright paintings in caves in France clearly show people wearing 20th century clothing. One painting led to an underground pyramid complex. French historian and archaeologist Robert Giroux dated them at 15,000 before Christ. 11. Claudius Aelianus referred to Atlantis in his 3rd century work The Nature of Animals. 12. Theopompos, Greek historian, wrote of the huge size of Atlantis and its cities of Machinum and Eusebius and a golden age free from disease and manual labor. 13. James Churchward wrote several volumes of books documenting ancient writings he claims to have translated in Southeast Asia concerning Atlantis and Mu, while geologist William Knighton claimed to have excavated identical tablets in Mexico. 14. Dr. George Hunt Williamson, who authored several books on his Atlantean-Lemurian research in the 1950s, was an anthropologist explorer once listed in Usu in America. Williamson wrote how descendants of the Incas led him to an ancient manuscript in a temple in the Andes Mountains that told of the destruction of Atlantis and Mu, which had an advanced technology, by earthquakes and tidal waves. Williamson also visited dozens of Indian tribes in the United States and Mexico that told him of Atlantis and Mu, including the Hopi Indians. 15. Tablet from Lhasa, Tibetan also from Easter Island. It is clear from ancient writings that belief in Atlantis was common and accepted in Greece, Egypt, and Mayan and Aztec empires by historians. The Basques of Spain, the Guils of France, the tribes of the Canary and Azores Islands, a tribe in Holland, and dozens of Indian tribes all speak of their origins in a large lost and sunken Atlantic land. Belief in a large sunken? Human footprints and shoe prints. A perfectly engineered cube, jewelry, a prehistoric animal with a hole in its skull that scientists admit only a bullet could make, a remnant of a screw, and other modern artifacts have been found in layered rock strata geologists admit formed on these objects millions of years ago. All of these discoveries were printed in public daily newspapers when they occurred, and left out of history books simply because historians could not explain them with their theories. Most all ancient civilizations believed in the Titans, the race of giant humans that inhabited Earth long ago. Different races knew them by different names. These 7 to 12-foot humanoids were thought to be legendary until the excavation of over a dozen skeletons 8 to 12 feet tall, around the world, shocked archaeologists. These skeletons were positively human. Some of these skeletal remains are on Maui in lava caves near Alupalakua and Oahu. The Spanish conquistadors left diaries of wild blonde-haired, blue-eyed 8 to 12-foot high men running around in the Andes during the conquest of the Incas. A couple were reportedly captured but died en route to Europe. If giant animals, dinosaurs, were possible, then why not giant men? The Germans and the Nordic Scandinavians spoke of a vanished continent in the North Atlantic Ocean called Thule with the civilization of Hyperborea located on it. Thule reported stretched into what is now the northern polar ice cap where it is buried underneath miles of ice so we cannot see it. Part 2. History is a repetition of golden ages followed by the ends of empires. The reason for writing the Earth history is to restate, it can happen again. Cosmic Reflections. Lost Continent of Lumania. Lost in Time. Lemurian Paradise. Procyon, the Galactic Center. History is a repetition of golden ages followed by the ends of empires. In the dawn of time, a civilization would begin and advance to greatness, only to be destroyed. Humanity would then regress back to primitive conditions and have to begin all over again. Little trace of the former empire would remain. Ancient historians stated that civilization has been completely destroyed at least 5 times, either by water or fire. The devastation came either in the form of volcanic earthquakes or a comet, fire, and earthquakes and tidal waves, water. The last end of an age came with a combination of fire and water combined with man's inhumanity to man. Waters that are now oblivion had become tombs of ice. Glaciers buried whole cities. The reason for writing the Earth history is to restate, it can happen again. Geologists around the world agree that the ice in Alaska and most other polar lands in the north were tropical thousands of years ago. Many plants, fish and animals native to subtropical climates have been found beneath the Arctic glaciers. Coral and palm trees are frozen in Alaska. Frozen animals were found devouring tropical vegetation, found crushed in herds in the positions of running from some cataclysmic disaster that occurred instantly. Scientists now have proof that the North Pole has shifted its position several times by many thousands of miles. What was once tropical is now ice cap. What was once glaciers is now the tropics. Here in 1990, experts agree that this reversal will occur within the next 50 years or less. If our cities were buried by ice thousands of feet thick weighing billions of tons, our scientists agree that it would grind them to dust beyond recognition, accompanied by thousands of years of rust and rot. To dust? Isn't that what happened to the Thule civilization spoken of by so many ancients? Many famous writers, like Diodorus, Pliny, and Virgil wrote about Thule, a land the Greeks knew existed before their time. They described Thule in the North Atlantic as warm and green surrounded by high mountains, known for breathtakingly beautiful women. The race reportedly was blonde with blue eyes. The men were exceptionally handsome, although some writers spoke of a violet-skinned race with golden hair that ruled these people that could have genetically died out and became extinct with the dinosaurs. The ancients agreed that the Hyperborean race was tall and in excellent physical condition, and some told of how they conquered the aging process and looked youthful in old age. They were reportedly vegetarians and fruitarians who lived in harmony with nature. Although several ancient writers firmly believed in Thule, historians of the Middle Ages, who had no evidence that the North was once warm and therefore inhabited, naturally censored it out of the history books we inherited. Today's science knows that the far north was once tropical. The South Polar continent of Antarctica was also once ice-free, and that fact is clearly shown on the ancient Peri Reis map seen displayed on television documentaries, which show mountain ranges not discovered until the 1940s. That map could only have been made before the ice cap. Even the Eskimos speak of the warm lands in the north that was the cradle of civilization as they knew it. A German archaeologist, Jürgen Spanuth, wrote that he went to Egypt, where he deciphered some hieroglyphics telling of a lost empire in the north. In 1953, Jürgen found ruins of an ancient city of unknowns on the bottom of the North Sea, and he produced photographic evidence. During the 1920s to 30s, German researchers who were exploring ancient Nordic writings became believers in the lost continent of Thule, and the race of supermen who had existed then during a glorious golden age. They were convinced that the supermen were genetically and culturally the most advanced race in world history, and convinced Hitler and his inner circle that the Nazis' Aryan race descended from the Thule supermen. These German professors and historians believed that the Hyperboreans had telepathic and cosmic powers, had been destroyed by ice, and that humanity had degenerated. When Bormann, Hitler and his central aides heard this research, they theorized that the Nordic Aryan race in Germany had descended from the supermen who had once ruled the planet, and therefore the Aryans were the superior race. Hitler made it the ideology that the Third Reich of the Aryan Nazis were the return of the super race for a future golden age. Remember that Nazi science in the 1930s and 40s was, in many ways, more advanced than in the United States and other nations. The Nazis had rockets, jet planes, radar, and many weapons before any other country, and had superior submarines and the first freeways. In 1945 they were experimenting with real flying saucers that were destroyed in Allied bombings, and the inventors burned the blueprints. The conquering Allies were astounded to find crude but working saucers and tried to reproduce them in strict yet unsuccessful secrecy, while captured German rocket scientists invented the United States space program. Yet even more shocking was the diaries of Nazi leaders who seriously based their world plans on literature about Thule, psychic powers, Atlantis, and ancient supermen. The founders of the Nazis believed that they were destined to create the new super race that would rule this planet in the future golden age. The Nazi leaders were convinced that all of history was in cycles, consisting of golden ages followed by disasters. Hitler stated that the repetition of history required that to recreate the supermen who had come and gone, the Nazis must exterminate all of the inferior races they believed inhabited the planet. It was their belief that it was the destiny of the Nazis, in the universal plan, to manifest the age of Aquarius and a new race. They believed Earth was near the end of a cycle when all nations would again be destroyed. Bipolar shift, earthquakes, fire and tidal waves, the Nazis had plans to survive in underground cities in South America, as they believed the Atlanteans had, those who rounded the Aztecs, Incas and Mayans. The Nazis transferred millions of dollars of their gold and secret armies and many scientists to a remote region in Argentina to survive. The infamous genetic experiments on prisoners in Nazi concentration camps were attempts to manipulate genes to create and breed the new race, which was to be founded by blonde, blue-eyed Nazi SS troops. Hitler sent generals and SS agents to the Himalayan mountains to try to learn the yogi techniques of mind over matter for the new race. Details can be found in book entitled Morning of the Magicians. We are not sure how long ago Thal was destroyed. Some ancient writers claim Hyperboreans became so highly evolved over thousands of years that they became transparent beings. Is this the teleportation which our own scientists admit will be possible in the future? We do know that a beautiful chalice made of zinc and silver with intricate inlaid flower designs all over it was excavated 15 feet deep in solid rock that geologists confirm was solidified millions of years ago. In 1851, an engineered iron nail was found in Salzburg, Austria in a perfectly formed quartz crystal which geologists said solidified 12 million years ago. The Hitler Nazis could have done well with their advanced knowledge, yet they misused it for evil and immoral scientific purposes, much like the Atlanteans had done. They also misused psychic powers, just like the Atlanteans had done. Cosmic Reflections. In 1972 to 1978, a Maui-based scientific research development agency named Mind International had its agents around the globe collecting evidence about vanished civilizations. Mental Investigations into News Developments was created in 1967 as the Department of Information and was renamed in 1974 to encompass every type of knowledge on the planet, in search of the ultimate truth. Mind sent agents around the world to collect information that necessarily was excluded from the history books in the United States. Many artifacts and ruins were discovered and publicized in different locales around the world but were necessarily and consciously omitted from the American educational system. The age and technological advancement of many artifacts and ruins contradicted college history texts. Belief in ancient super-civilizations and their relics is common in Peru, India, Ecuador, and Tibet. In 1976, Mind directors Philip Geiger, Steve Forsberg, and Steve Omar published a small newspaper called International Intelligence out of Van Nuys, California. Geiger worked closely with associate Nick Edwards, who was involved in the discovery of an underwater pyramid off the Louisiana coast, at the Shindelta Islands. Forsberg had dove onto the ruins near Bimini Island in the Bahamas, ruins that are believed to be from Atlantis. All three directors had personally interviewed Dr. Maxine Asher, the most celebrated and publicly reported Atlantine discoverer. All Mind agents had different missions. By example, Omar was first assigned to study every religion, philosopher, and historian and recorded history in college libraries. Omar had majored in history in college. In France were 6 volumes of ancient history by the famed French historian-archaeologist Robert Charroux, who had amassed data from travel in remote areas, and some 30 years of research in museums, monasteries and caves. Today, none of these volumes can be found in original or reprinted form anywhere in Hawaii or the United States. In his volume, Masters of the World, Charroux writes, "The true history of civilization is forbidden. Powerful conspiracies try to allow only a distorted version to be expressed. Our social and religious history has been falsified for thousands of years, ever since the Egyptians, forgetting or ignoring the truths handed down to them by their ancestors, gave themselves the title of the first initiators in civilized people. The Greeks also forgot to pay tribute to their Celtic and Egyptian teachers and presented their country as the cradle of mankind. Then came the Hebrews. That was the final blow. Note, the Greeks and Egyptians even wrote that they existed during the time of Atlantis. The Roman Christian emperors and priests ordered the burning of the biggest library in known history at Alexandria, Egypt, because it contained books about civilizations and religions that existed long before Genesis and the Bible. The 9 other ancient large libraries were also destroyed. The books about Atlantis and Mu by the Aztecs, Mayans, and Incas were burned by the invading Spaniards, who viewed such histories as a threat to their religious histories. Yet a few volumes were hidden away by scholars who feared the destruction of same. They have remained for today's open-minded researchers. This is the Ageless Wisdom. Lost Continent of Lumania. A book written in the language of India, which includes 2 ancient maps showing the lost continent of Lumania, was sent to Dr. Ronald P. Anjard, by an Indian ancient historian, astronomer and author named Sampathy Iyer. In addition, an ancient stone carved into the theorized shape of Lumania, was sent to Dr. Anjard by Miss Enid M. Irwin, and this information was sent to MIND International headquarters on Maui. Anjard wrote about the Mascara continent where the civilization of Lumania reportedly existed in what is now the Indian Ocean, with parts stretching into Australia. Indonesian islands are said to be the remaining mountain peaks of this sunken continent that existed even before Atlantis. In 1974, a United Nations diplomat investigating lost continents, Farida Iskiovit, told MIND International directors in Hawaii that she found out about a mysterious ruined pyramid in Indonesia from a prehistoric culture. In 1977, a MIND International agent from Australia, Colin Amory, reported the discovery of mysterious ruins in the remote Australian wastelands. My research in recent months suggests that in caves in the desert of Western Australia, machinery and priceless artifacts dating back to the period of Lemuria have been stored. There are stories of temples hidden in rainforests. Amory added that he discovered a small temple over an underground temple, stretching down about 1,000 feet. During the 1960s, many newspapers and magazines reported the discovery of strange metallic balls found in the Australian desert, of unknown origin. All attempts to open them with machines and weapons failed and the metal composition was unknown. Is there a relation? Lumania was not the Pacific continent of Lemuria, also known as Mu, Pan, Mar, and Mur. Lumania appears to date earlier. Lost in time. Lost in time. Lumania has left a lack of ruins scientists have found in the Indian Ocean, perhaps so ancient as to have disintegrated. All we have is Dr. Anjard's maps and writings from ancient times and a scant few artifacts and the underground temple. Jane Roberts, a medium of the Edgar Cayce ilk, claims these data on Lumania that we will describe below, though we have no way of proving what she said. According to Roberts, the Lumanians were scientifically advanced far beyond 20th century technology in America, and they lived in futuristic-style underground cities. They formed energy fields around their cities to protect them from huge terrifying animals that overran Earth then, dinosaurs, as well as savages. The Lumanians did not attempt to form an empire like Atlantis later did, but instead concentrated their population on Mascara with only a few underground cities on other continents. The Lumanians had no desire to contact or influence the masses of primitive savages overrunning the world then. The entrances to these underground cities were hidden in the backs of natural caves. The doors were translucent to allow people to see out, yet nobody outside could see in. Underground tunnels connected the cities with high-speed monorails. The Hopi Indians, the ancient Hawaiians, and the Nahakals of Burma all told of the lost continent. On Maui, hidden deep in the dense rainforests of the upper slope of Eek Crater, is ruins of a temple and sundial from a lost civilization not in any history book about Hawaii. Numerous other mysterious pre-Hawaiian ruins were found in Maui jungles. We interviewed Mrs. Hildra James, founder of Mama's Fish House on Maui, descendant of Hawaiian royalty, about how she and her associates flew over ruins in a helicopter and witnessed same. Also, we interviewed the acclaimed world's leading authority on Hawaiian history, Mrs. Inez Ashdown, who had a photo of Eek Crater ruins. Also Marielle Fankhauser, formerly of Xi'an International on Maui, explored many other ruins on Maui which she believed were from Lemuria, including some Parakapo and Wainarpanapa. The Lemurians worshipped the sun god and named their empire after that concept. Lemurian paradise. The literal translation of the word Maui is sun god. The famous crater on Maui, Hulikala, is translated the house of the sun. The Temple of the Sun was the pyramid center of the Empire of the Sun and the point in the greater scheme of the cosmos. The Sun King or Emperor of the Sun was the divine ruler of the Empire of the Sun. The City of the Sun was the capital city of planet Earth during the golden age of the Empire of the Sun and was known as Hamekalaya. According to a map of Lemuria published in the Sunday edition of the Los Angeles Times, July 31, 1977, Hamekalaya was in the vicinity of Maui. It also showed Mu stretching from off the coast of California to the region of Japan, and south through Easter Island and Tahiti. According to Churchward, Mu was about 5,000 miles long and 3,000 miles wide, a beautiful tropical paradise like the Garden of Eden. He claims there were 64 million people who died in the sinking, and that it dated back over 50,000 years. The Pacific Islands are the remaining mountain peaks of the lost continent. Precise detailed maps of the lost continent of Mu and Atlantis were found on Javier Cabrera, engraved in stone and photographed by Robert Giroux. United Nations diplomat Farida Escaviat, assistant to United Nations President Adam Malik, came to Maui in 1972 and researched Lemurian ruins and history and concluded that they were real. One of Hawaii's leading authorities on Lemurian research was Sergeant Willard Wannell from Army Intelligence in Oahu. He reported that ruins of a submerged Lemurian city was between Maui and Oahu. It was a top-secret project of naval intelligence in 1972. Procyon, the galactic center. The central orb in the middle of our galaxy is Procyon. Each star in our galaxy orbits around this central sphere. Sirius, Vega, Alpha Centauri, and other sun-like globes also have planets orbiting around them, as they rotate around our central sun, Procyon. It takes our sun star 26,000 years to complete one orbit around Procyon, one galactic year. There are 12 force fields of cosmic energy radiating out across the galaxy from the Procyon. As it completes one galactic orbit, it passes through each of these 12 force fields, galactic months. Each galactic month is about 2,166 solar years, and one galactic year is 26,000 solar years. Nearly one galactic year ago, 26,000 years, was the golden age of the Empire of the Sun, when humanity lived in peace, love, harmony and prosperity beyond anything we could imagine in these 1990s. As our sun star orbits around the central sun, we are now entering the first rays of the Aquarian force field, as we leave the rays of the Piscean force field. We are now on the cusp, feeling both the vibrations of a dying age and the dawn of a new age. This is the cosmic science of Mu based on the writings of James Churchward and Dr. George Hunt Williamson, who spent dozens of years studying ancient writings from Mu. Part 3. Empire of the Sun. Migrations in Time. Crystal Cities of Atlantis. Atlantine Science. The Empire at its height. The end of the Empire. Empire of the Sun. The Sun of the Empire of the Sun was the cosmic symbol for the primary creative energies radiating from the central sun in the center of the universe, the beneficial energies of time and space from higher dimensions, the source of all life, matter, and energy. The Sun further represented in microcosm the sun within every human being, the invisible eternal flame that united man with his cosmic creator. The Lemurian Mu people believed that the sun within man was located in the third eye, the invisible eye within us that is tuned into our innermost visions. According to Churchward, much of the Mu civilization lived in homes with transparent roofs. They were free from stress and disease and lived to be hundreds of years old, developing their ESP abilities through nearly 40,000 years of societal practice and experimentation. With that many centuries of evolution, the Mu gained their reputation for telepathy, astral travel and teleportation. Making land vehicles unnecessary. Most of those who have written about Lemuria claim they were primarily socially a vegetarian, agricultural, outdoor, organic culture that worked in harmony with nature and the land, having little use for scientific technology. Lemurians had concentrated on meditation and extrasensory perception (ESP) development. Lemuria had relatively little interest in Atlantine technology and preferred to experiment with psychic energies to move objects, proven by Uri Geller during his research at Stanford University in the 1970s, although they did use ultra-high-frequency sonic, solar energy, crystal energy, and teleportation to build and move objects as well. One account describes premarital tests in Lemuria. Written by a man named Serv, a Rosicrucian historian. The elders required a man and woman to give all of their possessions to the priest so that they had absolutely no clothing, food, shelter, or any tools. The man and woman were then sent into the woods for 1 month, 28 days, naked. During that time, they had to build their shelter, make their own clothing, gather their own food, make their own tools, and provide for each other without getting into any argument or projecting any negativity toward each other. If they passed that test, they were married and their possessions were returned. If they failed the test, they could not be married. Migrations in time. Lemurians migrated from that mid-Pacific continent to the continent of Atlantis, where they reportedly evolved that society toward scientific perfection. Contemporary literature marvels at inventions that seem like science fiction. lamps that burned with brilliance for thousands of years without maintenance, spoken of by so many ancient writers, were one legacy of Atlantis. Some of these Maxine lights were still brilliant when the Spanish explorers found them blazing deep in the Amazon jungle over 10,000 years later. Documented by Robert Giroux's books, ancient historians found the Maxine lights still burning in Egypt, which was the Atlantean colony of Luxor, over 9 centuries after the flood, in temples of doors that they reported had opened and closed automatically and were guarded by robots. Crystal cities of Atlantis. Robert Giroux documents the ancient texts these inventions were found in. Yet perhaps as amazing was the submerged city found off the Bahamas by 5 scuba divers in 1970, with its majestic golden-hued pyramid surrounded by domes, rectangular buildings, unidentified metallic instruments, and the statue holding the mysterious crystal containing 7 miniature pyramids. The crystal, brought to the surface by Dr. Ray Brown, amplifies energy passed through it, emits rays that heal diseases, and is made in a method unknown to the scientists who analyzed it. It was found in a mysteriously lit-up chamber inside the underwater pyramid with some kind of ray gun-like instrument pointed at it. Kirlian photographs, which record impressions beyond our limited range of vision, showed an eye inside a crystal not visible to the naked eye. What technology could build a long blacktop paved road for hundreds of miles that was still in good condition over 10,000 years later? This road was found underwater off the east coast by the deep-diving submarine Illuminaut and contained magnesium oxide. In 1977, a mysterious discovery was made on the floor of the Atlantic concerning an unknown technology. A 650-foot pyramid was mysteriously lit up, with sparkling white water surrounding it that turned deep green, a shocking contrast to the dark black waters at that depth. The discovery was photographed by Almara Hall's expedition off Cape Sal. Dr. William Bell's 1958 photos taken on the bottom of the Atlantic showed a 6-foot spire protruding from a couple of circular gear-like bases, with peculiar light emanations from the bottom of the shaft. Were these the remnants of the eternal flame spoken of by the ancients, powered by an interdimensional cosmic energy taken out of the atmosphere by a form of crystal conductor at the apex of pyramids or towers? Pyramids larger than any building in the world made in our modern times have been found on the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean and in China, and one in Egypt that our own technology has failed to match. These pyramids have cement that our scientists admit is superior to what we use today. The writings of the ancients describe pyramids as time capsules containing the history and technology of the Empire of the Sun and latter-day Atlantis. A huge pyramid, in 10,000 feet of Atlantic water, was reported to have been found with a pulsating crystal on top of it, by Tony Bennick's expedition. The group also found an opaque crystal tablet there, and reported that when the light was beamed through it, mysterious inscriptions became visible. More underwater pyramids were found off Central America, Yucatan, and Louisiana, where domes were found in the Straits of Florida. A marble Greek-style building was found between Florida and Cuba. And what about the column that radiated energy Dr. Zink found at the Bahamas in 1957? Zink also brought up other artifacts from his dives over Atlantis, and he was interviewed by Mind International agent Steve Forsberg. One of the most amazing finds on the bottom of the Atlantic was reported by Captain Reyes Moraga's crew on the salvage ship Talia from Spain. They videotaped miles of pillared temples, buildings, and statues and wide curving boulevards, with smaller avenues branching out from the center like spokes in a wheel, with majestic temples and pyramids. Much of this city, as well as the city found off Spain by Dr. Maxine Asher's expedition and later by Professor Akayanov's expedition, all photographed, show a startling similarity to Plato's description of Atlantis. More than 30 separate ruins have been found on the bottom of the Atlantic since 1956, and in ancient libraries, several old maps showing Atlantis and its island chain have been found. The islands are known as Arion, Og, Poseid, and Antigua, and the nation was Atlan. Garden City, or Poseid, was reportedly the capital of a continent stretching from off of North Africa and Europe to off Florida, with a tropical climate on the western and southern shores, and a cool climate on the north and east. According to Plato and many other ancient historians, Atlantis had the most advanced and peaceful government in the world during its height, and for thousands of years planet Earth was at peace with a form of political system we have not seen the equal of since. Respected ancient historians and explorers like Diodorus, Cantor, Marcellinus, Proculus, Plutarch, Herodotus, perhaps the greatest historian of ancient times, Timagenes, Aelinus, Theopompos, and more all wrote about the Atlantis they believed was a real superior civilization lost in time. All ancient nations in the Americas spoke of Atlantis in their writings. Atlantean science. What was life like in the golden age of Atlantis? Ancient writers tell of how people lived to be 1,000 years old in an age when cosmic science ended all disease, and of an empire that accumulated so much gold over 50,000 years that they paved their streets with it, covered their temples and buildings with sheets of it, and wore fine gold-meshed clothing. Gold was worth virtually nothing in the Atlantean Empire. It was a building material as common as steel is today. The Atlanteans theoretically mined most of the world's gold supply and used it. Ancient writings from around the world are clear in their detailed accounts of the spaceships and advanced aircraft of Atlantean times. The Mayans, Aztecs, and Incans told the conquistadors of these Atlantean skyships that transported the white celestial rulers from the east. Atlantean technology spread to the Rama region of Asia with their expanding colonizations. The ancient Vaimanika Sastra writings discovered in India in 1875 details the size of flying machines, how they are steered, how they are protected from violent storms and lightning, and how to switch the drive to solar energy when the fuel supply becomes low. The writings relate to 70 authorities and 10 experts on ancient air travel. The texts are extremely precise and easy to understand by modern scientists, except for several metals and alloys which they cannot recognize. Vimanas were the flying boats of the Golden Age in ancient writings from Asia. 4 main types of Vimanas were described, including the conical gold craft, the silver rockets, the 3-story airships, and the Sakuna ships that were constructed in bird shapes. There were 113 different models of these 4 base classes of airships. 8 solar energy tubes were described in the solar energy propulsion section of the text. The ancient Vaimanika Shastra text clearly describes pilot training, flight paths, individual parts of flying machines, as well as clothing for pilots and passengers, and the food recommended for a long flight. Included in these writings is technical detail on the metals used, and propulsion units. There is a checklist of 32 instructions for the pilots before they were allowed to fly. The instructions included battle maneuvering, how to use instruments to see and hear at great distances, and how to zigzag. 16 types of heat-resistant metals were named. Other ancient historical writings from India describe mercury-powered aircraft, thought to be unbelievable until NASA scientists discovered that mercury is a superior rocket propulsion system. How did the ancients know about mercury rocket propulsion and solar energy drives? More remarkable is the ancient literature from Egypt, Central America, Asia, Phoenicia and Babylonia concerning how these spacecraft traveled to other planets and returned to Earth, how they utilized weapons in a Star Wars fashion, how these crafts could not be damaged by humans on Earth, and were piloted by astronauts. Ancient paintings and carvings show in space suits. The Atlanteans definitely sent spacecraft to their colonies in Luxor and the Middle East, to Central America and Asia, according to many ancient writings. These writings sounded too much like science fiction to the early Christians who lived in a much later day, so they censored these accounts from our history books. And yet, historians believed all they saw in the sky. Some modern researchers believe the later Star of Bethlehem was a spaceship, because no star can travel billions of miles in a few hours. UFOs look like stars from a distance. Atlanteans who had spacecraft, as well as the Asvans in Asia with their triangular 3-wheeled flying machines described in the Rig Veda, and the Lemurians with their Ararava flying pearly shells of divinity that were capable of interplanetary travel and theoretically could have gone to Mars. Why was it that the NASA space program sent probes to photograph Mars, which took clear photographs of a mysterious face and pyramids on Mars, that were published in major and local newspapers across the United States in September 1988? Were these connected to the pyramids and Sphinx in ancient Egypt and Atlantis by the same race that colonized Egypt from Atlantis? Were ancient astronauts who ruled the ancient world based on Atlantis? The truth is that people in ancient empires before Christ believed in ancient aircraft and spacecraft and interplanetary travel as easily as the public does today. Why then do so many people today refuse to believe what the ancients believed was reality simply because it was 2,000 years ago? The Hebrews and Romans and medieval priests later censored facts like spacecraft, the map of our solar system, and other truths out of history books for their Earth is the center of the universe, there are no planets after Saturn, the sun revolves around the Earth, the world is flat, and other lies then part of their history books. Columbus and telescopes proved medieval history books false. Just like ruins on the bottom of the ocean are now proving current history books false. The moon was said to have once been part of the Atlantean Empire. The first satellite to orbit the moon sent back a photo of an ancient pyramid on the dark side of the moon that we have examined, and it was censored from the public by the United States government with other moon ruins. Ruins of walls and roads were found on the moon by astronauts who will not speak publicly due to the $10,000 fine, 10-year jail sentence, and dishonorable discharge for violating official the United States Government Regulation 200-2. Note: William Blair, archaeologist specialist from the Boeing Institute of Biotechnology, analyzed a photo taken by Lunar Orbiter 2 probe from the western edge of the Sea of Tranquility on the moon, showing a clear white structure resembling the Washington Monument and estimated 639 feet tall. There were similar structures nearby. Their triangular similar structures were clearly not randomly irregular. In his well-researched book, Footprints on the Sands of Time, L.M. Lewis details all the ancient writings about Atlantean Air Force. The Empire at its height. Most ancient writers on Atlantis agree that the Atlanteans attained a zenith of luxury and that it led to their downfall. The ancients said Atlanteans became so materialistic and hedonistic that they lost their spiritual vision and turned away from God. We have no ancient writings describing details of life in Atlantis. That is, found in the world's museums and libraries, other than these referenced above. We do have the writings of the many mystery schools, the cosmic universities from the dawn of time claiming to have preserved the ageless wisdom secretly through the centuries. The mystery schools from Lemuria and Atlantis reportedly taught the history of the planet since the dawn of time, and the secrets of how to master life and the environment, how to heal all diseases, slow the aging process, control the weather, eliminate harmful insects, alchemy, and how to use crystals for power systems. The mystery schools also taught telepathy for communications, teleportation for travel, and mind-over-matter techniques that gave those initiates superhuman powers. This knowledge, known as the secret science, is available today to the accepted initiates of the existing mystery schools around the world to pass on to a future age when the mass of humanity would be evolved enough to inherit it. That age is now approaching. Based in secret temples inside Mount Shasta, the Andes, Tetons, Himalayas. The only ruins of land transport reported as the evidence of monorails and plastic buildings on the floor of the Atlantic reported by Boris Cisterua's expedition from a sunken city 400 miles off of Portugal. Atlanteans were said to have been extremely good-looking people. They allegedly wore intricate jeweled clothing, and living a life of leisure of fun, partying, feasting, dancing, and bliss on exotic drugs. In their creation of heaven on earth, they had no desire to pursue the idea of heaven after death, believing they had it mad on earth. Biologists today admit that the brain capacity of skulls found from the later Atlantean era is larger than that of modern man. They used the 90% of the brain that the average human cannot use today and could see and hear beyond our very limited range of those senses and see in auras of rainbow colors around all living things and hearing into the higher frequencies of the animals. Atlanteans created a national workforce of robots, androids, and humanoids from genetic engineering to create and maintain most of the material plane empire, and that computers controlled the robots and androids. Perpetual motion machines were created that created and operated other machines and repaired them. Atlantis was on the verge of life without instrumentalities. In other words, the empire was controlled by machines and computers that did everything for the citizens. No Atlantean had to work or go to school. Vril helmets educated the people while they were asleep. A teenager had knowledge beyond that of even the mood-respected geniuses of our age. With a 1,000-year lifespan to acquire knowledge, Atlanteans were aware and informed beyond our imaginations. Atlantean science then fostered some bizarre genetic creations. They discovered ways to crossbreed species to create mermaids and mermen, cyclops, unicorns and other creatures we call mythology, but the many ancient writers called reality after seeing them. Apparently some survived till the rise and fall of the Greek Empire, where belief in such creatures was widespread. The end of the empire. Genetic engineering also resulted in Atlanteans of super strength and huge stature, titans, able to perform Superman tasks. The Atlantean people could also telepathically communicate with porpoises, their symbol. The Atlanteans mastered submarines. They created underwater cities in the Atlantic Ocean in domes. Atlantean scientists also learned how to block brain impulses to parts of the brain that cause crime and negative emotions. They later used this technique to control minds. They were quite clever. They took over the government. The leaders began to keep the secret sciences from the general population in order to control the masses. The masses depended on the government for food, clothing, and shelter. Those leaders claiming to be high priests in the pyramid temples were really mad scientists with a super science that seemed like magic to the uninitiated. The bored leaders of Utopia, with an entire planet as their toy and game board, began to seek satisfaction and power because there was nothing left materially to attain. The hedonistic population became so entranced by exotic drugs and leisure and materialism they worshipped the scientific priests and lost awareness of the reality around them. Hence, telepathic warfare, human sacrifices, and a war of minds throughout the empire broke out. Atlantine leaders wanted to control the whole world and form a planetary empire. They offered other continents their technology and luxuries in exchange for control of those nations, and many empires joined Atlantis. However, the Rama Empire in Asia and the Athens Empire in Europe refused to become Atlantine. Atlantine's psychic attack on those lands failed against even more superior cosmic forces. World leaders warned the Atlantine citizens and leaders that they would destroy themselves as well as life itself if they didn't stop misusing cosmic, nuclear, and psychic energies, that the misuse of technology could lead to terrible earthquakes, tidal waves, and eruptions that could destroy the empire. This warning was ignored by millions and millions of people, who just like today, lived for today while ignoring the future. Humanity so concerned about their daily existence and pleasures that they ignored the future, to their own demise. Some believed that their great scientists could save them with technology. Many believed that people simply reincarnate, so why fear death? Government scientists knew that cataclysms had already destroyed most of Lemuria around 24,000 before Christ, Thal before that, and had split up Atlantis into 3 huge islands only 400 years earlier. Atlantine scientists created underground cities in South America, under the Atlantic Ocean, below the South Polar Continent, then ice-free, and on the Moon to escape worldwide calamities. They had huge aircraft waiting to rescue them. Most incredible was Rainbow City beneath Antarctica, and ultra-modem space-powered. Rainbow City and the Inner Earth by Michael Barton. Part 4. Star Wars. Nuclear bombs of ancients. Ruins discovered. Lost in the sands of time. From dust to dust. Starting again. Star Wars. The Atlantines used laser rays and crystals to fuel their power plants. There was a huge firestone, with power generated by filtering the rays of the sun through ruby prisms, which concentrated energy upon instruments connected in the transportation complex by remote control. Inside a huge dome with a sliding roof, cosmic energy stations transmitted beams that could be turned up so high, they became the famous death ray. According to Ruth Montgomery and Edgar Cayce in their metaphysical receiving sessions, scientists also perfected antimatter. When a beam of antimatter comes in contact with ordinary matter, it instantaneously converted it into invisible energy. In other words, it vaporized it. No wonder traces of Atlantine buildings and cities are so hard to find. They were converted into invisible energy. It is said that one of these antimatter rays is still operating in the Bermuda Triangle, underwater, and has been causing ships and planes to disappear. Today that ray is out of control. Many Atlantines fled to underground cities that were later buried by flooding oceans, crushed under the glaciers, or buried by mud and debris. This metaphysical version of Atlantis is difficult to prove without visible evidence. However, ancient writings tell about much of the destruction and the weapons involved. A world war broke out over planet Earth, and spread into outer space. British astronomers have published evidence that some of the moon craters are formed exactly like atomic bomb craters on Earth, which have a wall and floor structure totally different from the usual meteor craters nearby. Lamont Observatory, Great Britain. On moon craters, there are reports of astronauts finding unusually high radiation emissions coming from those craters. Apparently a war broke out between the Rama Empire and Telos, North America, and Atlantis and Athens, which developed into a world war. The war spread to South America, where magnificent monolithic cities were found by Spanish explorers in the remote dense Amazon jungle in the explorations in search of the 7 cities of gold between 1500 and 1775. Explorers' diaries and books, left to us in South American libraries, tell of once splendid cities totally devastated by some huge cataclysm. Buildings appear to have been melted by some fantastic heat. Huge trees were toppled like toys. No human remained in these cities to tell the story. One expedition reported finding a splendid city in which absolutely no vegetation would grow even though it had been surrounded by the dense jungle for untold thousands of years. Logically, the rainforest should have overgrown the city, but atomic radiation had prevented this from happening. Many local tribes told the Spaniards that the abandoned cities were so old that there was no known history except that some horrible world cataclysm had destroyed the white races that had lived in them. Natives feared to even enter these ruins. Mysterious tribes of white Indians roamed the jungles nearby with no memory of their former glory. The statues remaining showed handsome white men. One city found was inhabited by a race of dwarf humanoids, perhaps a genetic mutation from atomic fallout. According to ancient books from India, like the Book of Jain, Ramayana, Dronaparva, and others, the Rama Empire was devastated by nuclear bombs, laser-powered guided missiles, rockets, and fallout described in such detail that the truth cannot be mistaken. There is no way that primitive men could have invented that technical knowledge. And the ruins of and radiated skeletons found in the Gobi Desert look exactly like what was left in Japan and the United States deserts after the first atomic bombs were tested and used. The desert sands in the ruined city in the Gobi is vitrified into glass just exactly like the desert sands in Nevada where atomic bombs were tested in the 1940s, and the huge hard solid stone buildings are melted by a temperature so high that it could have only been caused by lasers or atomic bombs. These ancient writings clearly detail weapons in warfare, not from a comet or meteor. Nuclear bombs of ancients. According to a very old historical book from India, the Book of Jain, huge metal aircraft landed in 2 cities in their area, and a war broke out using metal lances that traveled on a beam of light. What else could that mean other than a guided missile powered by a laser beam? The book continues to give a vivid detailed description of the atomic explosions that followed when the missile hit its target, including the mushroom cloud, the fireball that made men blind when they looked at it, the unbearable wave of heat, genetic deformities after the battle, and radiation sickness exactly like what happened in Hiroshima, Japan after an atomic bomb was dropped in 1945. How could ancients have known such details without witnessing to it? Furthermore, the Sanskrit Masala Purva refers to an unknown weapon described as an iron device that shot out a thunderbolt which reduced to ashes entire races of the Vrishnas and the Anhakas. The corpses were so burned as to be unrecognizable. Pottery broke. Birds turned white. All foodstuffs were later infected. Doesn't that sound just like an atomic explosion and fallout symptoms? The Rig Veda adds more details, stating, the fire from the terrible weapon destroyed cities by producing a light brighter than 1,000 suns. This fire made men's hair and nails fall out and colored their feet red. Ruins discovered. The Asian city of Mohenjo-daro is one of the oldest ever found, and it looked like it was nuked. It originally was built on 2 islands in the Indus River. Within a radius of 1.5 kilometers, 3 different degrees of devastation spread out from the center like in atomic explosions. Enormous heat totally disintegrated the center of the city. Black fragments were melted and fused together everywhere here. There is no geological evidence of any volcanic activity in the area. The heat reached at least 2,000 degrees centigrade according to geological monitoring. Skeletons of people lying hand in hand were discovered all over the suburbs, as they had been struck suddenly. Where else did the Atlanteans strike? Why is it that all of the great Mayan, Aztec, Inca, and Toltec civilizations in the Americas were built in the South Tropics in hot, steamy, uncomfortable, humid jungles so dense it was a major hassle for farming and construction, or so high up in the desolate barren Andes farming was exceptionally difficult? The Spaniards were confused about why those races did not build their cities in the fertile, more pleasant valleys of what is now the United States, and asked the ancient rulers why. They all gave the Spaniards the same answer: North America is the land of death. They told of a huge war there long ago using terrible weapons from the sky that devastated the cities, and left a mysterious energy in the earth that killed the crops, poisoned the survivors, and ruined the soil. Atomic bombs, yeah? The Hopi Indians told of the destroyed Red City by terrible sky weapons before their times, and how they were the children of the rainbow from Sunken Mu. Dr. George Hunt Williamson in the 1950s and Maui's Leslie Ports in 1971 interviewed Hopis to get this information. In the 19th century, Captain Ives William Walker made some archaeological discoveries in that region that still baffle scientists. He said he discovered in the area between the Gila and San Juan many ancient ruins, including a city about a mile long. At the center of the city was a huge rock with the wreckage of an immense structure on top. The south end seemed to be melted with part of the rock. The lines of the streets were still visible, with the house positions. The local Indians had a religious fear of the ruined city, like the natives in South America. Other vitrified and melted ruins of stone cities were found in remote areas of Death Valley, California, the Gobi Desert, and incredibly, on the moon. This was censored by NASA. Some of the moon ruins information leaked out in the public on space mission broadcasts before the cover-up. For instance, the domical structures are partially filled up. Breach has either filled into structures before they were built or the domes are younger than the floor. The astronauts said all of that while exploring the moon in public broadcasts, and also used the terms blocks, roads, and the Apollo statement, "It's a pyramid shape." What were the astronauts describing? The official NASA explanation is geological metaphors. However, the scientist who taught geology to those astronauts admitted he was totally baffled by those terms. This geologist, Farouk El-Bez, added, "Not every discovery has been announced." Astronaut Irwin made the most direct comment, "That's the most organized structure I have ever seen." Mind International directors saw the photos taken of these obviously man-made structures from the Ur by Lunar Orbiter 2 and Ranger 4 satellites. In the public library in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, is the historical account of a hidden and great city of ancient date found without inhabitants. Over 300 men were on an expedition deep into the Amazon jungle in search of the gold, and they found a ruined paved road, part of which had been destroyed by a huge disaster. They followed into the ruins to a once splendid deserted city. The road in one area was a view of crystals in multicolored brilliance. We entered under 3 arches of great height. We made out letters which we copied. Behind was a wide street with houses of great size here and there, sculpted and blackened by age. The book went on to describe how there was no furniture in the houses, no footprints, and no life anywhere. There was a huge plaza, statue, and an obelisk badly damaged as if struck by lightning, and a temple with a magnificent facade. In the halls were found art of great beauty and statues and portraits. In all the expansive mills we found no grass, weeds, trees or plants. The country beyond the city consisted of green fields dotted with blooming flowers. Spherical gold coins, hieroglyphics, ancient beyond recognition, and artifacts were found. What disaster destroyed this once glorious city having no trace of inhabitants? And what energy other than nuclear fallout could exterminate all vegetation and keep the jungle from overgrowing the city for thousands of years? What caused great roads and buildings in a harbor-like structure to sink off Bimini Island in the Atlantic thousands of years ago, only to be rediscovered and photographed by Dr. Manson Valentine's expedition in the 1960s? And what of the similar ruins found underwater off Morocco, on the Atlantic Ampere Sea Mount in 1978, or in 1981 below the Atlantic off the Canary Islands by P. Capellano's expedition? What is the Lubai 70-foot rectangular structure photographed off Andros Island by different researchers, or the paved blacktop road in excellent condition on the bottom of the ocean off Florida found by the Nikolai Seleznev Aluminat? And what about the submarine that Commander Nikolai Seleznev commanded to take films of a huge dome, magnificent boulevards, temples, and homes on the Atlantic floor with mysterious energy rays still being emitted, that disrupted the entire electrical system on the sub? According to Dr. George Hunt Williamson, who wrote and lectured about an ancient manuscript he found in a temple in the Andes, wise Atlanteans and Lemurians who predicted the end escaped to safety areas high in the Andes and Himalayan mountains, as well as underground and side mountains, while many others were rescued in saucer-shaped spacecraft that took the survivors to Mars and Venus, to bases where they awaited to return to Earth to begin a new civilization. Apparently the Atlanteans and Lemurians had interplanetary craft. Williamson added that these wise leaders secretly buried the ageless wisdom, as well as the history and science of the Empire of the Sun in time capsules around the globe made of an indestructible metal called tellurium. What flying discs were made out of? Lost in the sands of time. We had been told that the Atlanteans nearly blew our planet up. They literally blew up their own empire. The Atlantine nation was destroyed in a single night. While part of Atlantis continued to be submerged over the waning centuries, most of the continent and its entire population were destroyed on a single night by tidal waves hundreds of feet high, earthquakes, fire, nuclear and cosmic explosions. According to psychics like Edgar Cayce and Ruth Montgomery, who both have over 90% accuracy at predicting major events in the 20th century, the death ray got out of control as it left the monolithic dome of Atlantis and vaporized the enemies. This ray could penetrate anything on Earth and across space, but could not hit a target on the opposite side of the world based on the universal laws of light refraction. So the death ray was aimed straight underground below Atlantis to travel through the Earth to strike cities in the Rama Empire on the opposite side. The resulting disruption of the inner Earth stability caused the planet to tip on its axis like a wobbling top, sending monstrous tidal waves over continents. Scientists have all the proof they need to verify this polar shift and how it brought glaciers to warm and dry lands immediately. It explains how oceans swept over the lands, nuclear ruins, arid radiated skeletons at the bottom of our present oceans. Scientists and tourists alike can see for themselves the ancient ruined city and its seaport and beaches 2 miles up in the Andes Mountains at Tiahuanaco, Bolivia, and you may dive off Paradise Point on Bimini Island and see ruins on the seafloor yourself. Huge cracks in the earth opened and swallowed entire cities, lava buried roads and towns, glacier ground cities to powder and covered them. The death ray and nuclear bombs disintegrated civilizations, and tons of mud from receding tidal waves buried whole cultures. 400+ miles per hour winds blew vehicles and objects high into the sky and out to sea, only to rain matter and flesh back to the new ocean bottoms. The rampaging fires destroyed every forest on the planet and most of its animal life. The annihilation was so complete that mammoths, saber-toothed tigers, bison, and other animals became extinct. Nuclear winter set in and the smoke of thousands of erupting volcanoes and bombs hid the sun for decades and froze life on the surface. Those who remained on the surface in colonies died. Underground survivors waited in bomb shelters for the deadly radiation to clear, on a planet where the sun and stars would not shine for Adam's group of dots. There's then a gap in history between the end of Atlantis and the dawn of Egypt, when the world was overrun by savages and nomads. Most alarming were the presence of the mutated humanoids called the Duros. Throughout these last few centuries, local newspapers around the world have reported human encounters with dwarfish hairy humanoids that have huge heads and large glowing yellow eyes. These subhumans live in caves and tunnels below forests and swamps. They are incredibly strong, and surface at night to capture cattle or other farm animals, yet sometimes capture humans for food, according to Richard Shaver, who spent over a decade investigating reports. Duros are the mutated descendants of Atlanteans who fled into underground tunnels to escape the destruction, and couldn't return to the surface for centuries due to atomic radiation fallout. When the radiation finally cleared somewhat, they had genetically adapted to the darkness in the tunnels and could no longer stand sunlight. The destruction of the power light transmitter on Atlantis had put out the lights in the tunnels. Shaver claims he penetrated their tunnels and before escaping witnessed Atlantine machinery still operating on perpetual motion engines and providing the Duros with various luxuries except for food. Throughout history, Duros have been mistaken for many mythological creatures that thousands of witnesses swear they saw in the Middle Ages to present. Not all mythical creatures are Duros, but many of the evil ones were. Duros terrorized farmers in Arkansas and Brazil in the 1970s. Underground in New Zealand and England, many witnesses have reported hearing the sounds of machinery coming from the depths of holes in the ground, as well as encounters with humanoid dwarfs with glowing eyes. The most effective weapon against them has been found to be a flashlight because the Duros are terrified of bright light. A few remain alive. Shaver added that he found evidence that part of the Atlantine Empire, known as Duros, was in underground cities below Antarctica. A very ancient map shows Antarctica before it had ice, with mountain ranges that modern science did not rediscover until the 1950s. This old map also shows Atlantis, the Peri_Rise map. The southern polar continent was then an Atlantine colony with underground cities where Atlantines fled to continue their civilization and scientific progress, without interruption, for 10,000 more years. Researchers like Michael Barton and Richard Shaver claim that many so-called U.F.O.S seen in our skies are piloted by Atlantines and Lemurians from Duros who live in an inner Atlantis with its capital city translated as Rainbow City. From dusk to dust, centuries vanished in time before the survivors returned to the surface of our planet from their underground shelters. It was a world altered beyond recognition on by the sands of time. Gone were all of humanity's great achievements. Gone was 60,000 years of scientific progress. Destroyed in one single night. Gone were the futuristic crystal cities, an age which today's science can only envision will be a reality really existed in that ever so faint yet brilliant distant past. Gone were the interplanetary ships, the teleportation temples, and the cities of gold. Gone were mankind's hopes, their dreams. From dust to dust. Starting again. Humanity was faced with the great task of building a new world in the face of the overwhelming devastation of the old. The New Age movement of that day grew to herald the long-prophesied vision of an age of peace, love, and brotherhood. It was written that less than 1/10 of humanity survived to witness the dawn of the New Age. Gone were the factories, the machines, and the robots that had supplied Atlantis with all her needs. Gone were the planetary governments that had made all decision for a race that had ceased to think for itself. What was left in the ashes was global anarchy. Some believed the Atlanteans had gambled with the Creator in a deadly game of life and had lost. The devastation that followed had few, if any, parallels in history. Humanity fumbled for 600 centuries, that's 60,000 years. Finding the vegetation too contaminated to eat and soil too contaminated to plant, lacking the knowledge of simple farming and not even knowing how to create a mere shovel, these Atlantine refugees from total luxury starved by the millions. After a few centuries humanity degenerated back into savagery. That is why relics of a Stone Age and a Space Age have been found in the same places. Technicians became cavemen,